This is Pastoring in the Digital Parish, your resource for community and insights for ministry in the digital realm. I'm Ryan Dunn, the host of this podcast and fellow practitioner of digital ministry. In many larger churches, online ministry is a delegated responsibility. So church leadership chooses an individual or team of individuals to lead an online ministry, while senior leadership primarily focuses in different areas. Not all of us have such an opportunity, though, do we? It may be the case that we don't have someone to which we can delegate. Or it might be that we are both the senior leader and the person who is carrying the passion to see the church extend its ministry into digital space. That can be a lonely feeling. But our adjunct professor for this session assures us we are not alone. And Rev Nicole Reilley is going to provide us with ideas and stories from her own experience in being a senior pastor at a traditionally based church and the chief cheerleader or a ringleader for pastoring a digital parish. Reverend Nicole Reilley has 30 years experience in full-time ordained ministry in the United Methodist Church. In 2012, she planted a series of house churches and got involved in training laity and clergy. Nicole now brings with her a passion for new ways of doing and being church to her work as a clergy coach, specializing in social media and clergy wellness. She's been coaching since 2015 and recently wrote Expanding the Expedition Through Digital Ministry, which, of course, caught our attention. Let's meet our adjunct professor, Nicole Reilley. Let's talk mission, vision, and why of digital ministry, because I'm sure that everybody listening has in some way, shape, or form heard a question that you address within your book. Isn't the digital world a poor substitute for in-person gatherings? We've heard something like it. Can you help us respond maybe constructively to that kind of questioning?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think it is a poor substitute for it. I think that there is a great opportunity here for people to connect to the church, and the digital place is one of those places that they can do that. I mean, I think about the number of people who are differently abled, and getting to a building is a huge issue for them. Or I think about the fact that 35% of all Americans who are working work on the weekends. So they can't come on a Sunday morning. I also think about college students. I've had conversations with college students who have just said, the church has been a lifeline for me. And if I had to go out and find another church, that just wouldn't be something I could do. So it's been a place where they've been able to continue to connect. And I also think about how there are so many people who moved in the last couple years. Maybe due to COVID, maybe they needed a bigger house, or they moved to be with parents to take care of them. And if you've ever shopped for a church home, you know that it can be a really tough place to find where you belong. And for churches that are online, they have an opportunity to continue to reach their people who maybe if you move to a new community, you just stop attending. So I think it's an important way that we are the church. I mean, there's a lot of diversity with churches, right? There are house churches that are really small. There's mid-sized churches that may do some great programming. There's mega churches that offer all that they do. And I think that the digital church is just one more expression of the diversity of churches and what the Holy Spirit is doing to reach people and also to disciple people who are already part of the church.
You mentioned there a subtle difference in how we think about digital ministry, in that it is a way of being just beyond what we kind of do in person. That there's a difference between a digital ministry and a church kind of being online, so to speak. So a lot of us might assume, well, we stream our worship service, so we have digital ministry, right? Can you flesh that out? Like how you might differentiate digital worship and digital ministry?
Yeah, sure. I think it's really great that a lot of our churches that may not have had worship online were able to put that together so quickly during COVID, right? So you had churches that weren't online at all. They stepped up into it. It was totally outside of their comfort zone. And as they then look at what next steps are, they may feel it's a little outside of their skill set or their financial abilities. But I think of it this way. I think that, digital worship is one thing, but digital ministry is a much bigger thing. It's kind of like in just a local church that you would go to in person. If all they offered was Sunday morning worship at 10 a.m., and then the rest of the week, there was no discipleship, no Bible study, no fellowship, no youth group, no children's ministry, we would not say that that is a church that has much of a presence in the community. And I think it's very similar to what we're talking about with the difference with just digital worship versus digital ministry. We want to be able to offer more than only worship, even though worship is, I think, really important. And for a lot of our congregations, it was a big hill to get over to do that. So I think it's good to acknowledge that the work people have done, but then it's what's our next step? And I think those next steps can be really simple. They don't need to be huge programs or lots of time and energy. We're really looking to just connect with and then understand who those people are and then take those next steps with them. And it can be as simple as acknowledging that people are worshiping online on Sunday, right? So when you start on Sunday morning and you welcome people in the room, welcoming people online, even that kind of very simple thing connects people, responding to people who make comment about a worship service, responding to people who comment on social media, helping people get connected in other ways. These are, I think, what's essential and moves us from an online worship service to online ministry.
Okay. What might be a step beyond that then, beyond something that is just connected to the worship event?
Yeah. So for us, we've done a variety of things, and some of them have been just very simple kinds of things. We've done meet and greet the pastors with people who are brand new. We've done an opportunity for folks to join a seasonal small group. I do a meditation class once a month, and we have invited people who are only online to come and be part of that as well, because it's an online offering. So we're looking for ways that we can connect and what we can offer people that will help them take some of their next steps.
Tell me about that online meditation, because so much of what we think about when it comes to contemplative practice is that there's a sense of embodiment to that. Mm-hmm. It's often that the word is often wrapped up in the language that we use around contemplation. So how are you leading through a meditative experience in the digital space?
Yeah, so I'm a certified mindfulness meditation teacher. And I have been someone who has had a contemplative practice for 40 years. And so for me, a lot of folks, I've experienced so many people looking for that contemplative opportunity, but driving somewhere, going somewhere isn't quite possible for them. So we offer this. We've done some introductions to mindfulness classes just online. And then we do a drop-in meditation once a month, so people are able to come. And I think in some ways, when you're in a room with everyone doing meditation, there can be a lot more distractions than if you are on your own, in your own space, which you can control in a variety of ways. And that can let you take that opportunity to become more internal.
What platform are you using for that meditation space?
We just use Zoom.
Okay.
Yeah.
And people are pretty comfortable with that?
Yeah. It's taken a while. I've done online discipleship groups since 2006, and we used to use like Google Hangouts. and they were awful. Everyone had a lot of trouble getting online, and people would be angry. People have learned how to operate, and so people are doing Zoom quite well.
And is there it's a responsive time for that, or is it okay?
Yeah, I usually do a little bit of teaching, and then we usually do 2 meditations. And then after each meditation, we check in, we say how we're doing, we talk about our practice, and we do a time of resourcing each other. So, yeah.
Well, in our Methodist tradition, discipleship is built in with presence, right? It's kind of implied. We practice discipleship by coming alongside one another. And you brought up the idea of kind of digital discipleship, of church being engaging with people online throughout the week. So can you tell us about some steps, or, well, you write about a pathway to engagement for digital ministry. Can you tell us like what that looks like in digital ministry?
So when I think of a pathway for engagement, I think I follow one that it comes from a writer named Nick Blevins. I think it's really simple to follow what he puts forward. And it starts with awareness. This is just that as people start their journey, they become aware that there's something out there. That may be because a friend posts about it on social media, or if they run across your service on YouTube, or you do a sponsored post, something like this. So awareness is first. Then we're looking at attention. And attention is that next step. You know, you've gotten their attention. They're not just aware you exist. They know a little bit about you. And so when we're in that attention phase with someone who's new in our digital ministry space, we're trying to look at how we can resource them. And so we'll invite them to fill out a Connect card online, which is a way for them to let us know who they are, what would be helpful to them. And we like to then also use text in church, that we invite them to text new to the number so we can connect them as well. We invite them to connect with us on social media or any of the online small groups that we're doing. And so once they have a sense of who we are, then we're working to really do that next phase, which is the connection phase. And one of the things we do here is an in-person one called Discovery, called Discover VUMC, Valencia United Methodist Church. And so we've done it online as well, where we just invite people to show up and have a Q&A time with the pastors, hear a little bit about who we are. We have this thing we call 7 Things We Know to Be True, which is kind of our value statement. And we're an inclusive community, so we'll talk about, you know, what it means, who we are, so no one is surprised about, you know, kind of where we sit on issues. And then once that they've had that connection, then we are looking to involve them at a higher level. And that is, you know, get them involved in a small group, just kind of what we would do if they were here in the building. We do have our small groups online, and we've had good participation even during the pandemic with people who didn't have that available to them, either at their church or they were, you know, I had this one friend who dragged her son along to her small group on Zoom. So it was a new experience for him. And I think that, you know, that involvement, getting connected, and not just involvement with online stuff, but we would do food drives during the pandemic and now after too. And so inviting people who are with us on the digital presence to go to their own food pantry and to be involved there. And then I think the last piece of it is what's called investment. And that's, you know, that's the people who are giving and serving in some way. And so it's kind of like a funnel, right? Awareness, attention, connection, involvement, investment. And it really lines up to, I think, what we experience in the church as well. But it is a lot of work, right? And it is a tracking of people and looking at where they're at and what's their next step and how do we engage them in it. But I think it's extremely important work to do, because for many people, this will be the only way they connect with us is online. So we want to help them take those next steps. I think when we look at the investment piece, we think, you know, that's a stage of engagement a lot of people don't get to. And I think that's true. But I also think one of the things we've worked on is in small groups, can we get somebody to do the opening prayer or the closing prayer or lead the discussion piece? So give them an opportunity to lead a little bit, but in the context of a small group they're already getting familiar with.
Mm. So is it fair to say that you're very intentional in terms of what you're posting online, in it being an invitation to take another step towards the community? Okay.
Yeah. And we're also, we have an old school Google Doc that we just track everybody in. And we sit down every week as a staff and we kind of say, do we need to send emails to these people to invite them to this? Do we need to connect these people to our children's ministry? How do we do this? And so it is, I think, fairly labor intensive. And I know, one of the things that happens is people say this is a lot of work for who, are we really making a difference? Mm-hmm. And I get that. I do get that. I get that frustration. Yeah.
Okay. So how do you deal with that frustration?
Well, I think of it in the same way that I hope a lot of our youth directors think, right? When you're a youth director in a church, you are sowing a lot of seeds. You don't know what's going to bring fruitfulness. You don't know if all that energy you put into that one student is going to make a difference down the road. And a lot of youth directors never see what it is that their ministry has done. But I think for me, and I think for our staff here, we know that we're making a difference because we hear just enough stories. On Easter, there were some people who came who had only worshiped with us online. And they thought, we'll come on a Sunday and, just to hear, how helpful this was, what a difference it made for them, how they're in a small group, how they're meeting people. And now, they're taking that step to be in person. That's not going to happen for a lot of people, but there are some. And so sometimes you do get to hear these little stories and they just kind of keep you going, which I think is ministry in general.
So in your invitations to next steps, are you always kind of pushing for people to kind of show up in person, or is there a digital equivalent to that?
Mostly there's, at our church, we focus on three things: worship, small groups, and service. And so those things can happen both in person and online. So we're inviting people to worship, we're inviting people to be in a small group, and we're inviting people to be in service, which can be, like I already mentioned, like if we're doing food drives, that they can be part of that wherever they are. So I think that what we focus on here translates fine to a digital experience as well as a house church experience. I mean, I think that this kind of framework works in a lot of different settings.
I want to get to talking about the relationship between this digital ministry and house church, since you do have a history of planting house churches. But I want to back up to the Google Doc that you were talking about, that you and your staff are assembling.
Yeah.
Where are you getting the names to put on that Google document?
Yeah, well, some of it is, I think one of the things that surprised me the most was we got names from people who were giving online.
Okay.
So there are some people who would fill out a Connect card. There are some people who would comment. There are some people who would connect with our children's ministry, and we'd learn about them that way. And then there were people who were giving online, and we were connecting with them that way. And so I don't think it's a ton of people, but I would say it's, half a dozen every week that we're connecting with in some way, who are either newer or we're working to move them through the steps. But we had people who came and were part of the church, kind of joined the church, because during the pandemic, it was not only the pandemic, it was also things about racial injustice. And so during that time, we lost families and we also gained families because we took a stance on Black Lives Matter. And I think that we met some of those families because they came over because we were making those statements, and then they were reaching out to us and giving us feedback that they were looking for a church that was taking an anti-racist stand. They were looking for something like this. So, yeah.
Okay. So for those folks who gave online, you were able to collect their name, some information. Yeah. What was your response to that? Like, what was the next step for you all to reach out to them?
So there was, I think of one family in particular who gave, and I emailed them and just introduced myself and let them know that, if they had any prayer requests, I'd love to, know what's on their heart that we could pray for. And they responded back and told us a little bit about themselves. And then, like a week later, I invited them I said, online worship, I think this week is going to be talking about this. I hope you'll be able to join us online. They responded back, yes, we're going to be joining you online. And, we're very interested to learn more about the church. And so then I said, you want to do a Zoom call? And they said, sure. So we did a Zoom call, so we spent half an hour meeting people who, were brand new to us. So, it's about people, right? We're working to connect with people. We're working to help people in their spiritual life and to take that next step. And so, there's not a one size fits all. It really is quite customized. And it really is. I mean, I think that's why we sit down every week and we look at the list and we think, what can we do? What's helpful? And I found it surprising that, people were quite excited to have a Zoom call with the pastors. People were like, oh, you would take time for this. And so it's been a great way to make connections with people, even during the pandemic and now beyond that.
The digital space has given us quite a bit of room for customization. And sometimes that can feel a bit draining because we feel like we have to kind of be all over the place for everybody, right? Yeah. Are there ways that you're able to, as a senior pastor, able to parse out some of that work?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a team effort. This is a church that very much works as a team. And we had a social media manager for a while, and then after COVID, she got a full-time job. So I picked that up because I really enjoy social media. For me, it's evangelism and communication. But I think I like the space because you hear from people email-wise, and it's easy to respond. I don't find it to be a huge thing, but we do it all together here. And the following up. So we even did a membership class online. We had a goal to have 50 new members as we reached our 50th anniversary, which was last July 15th. And so we did the membership class all online and pre-recorded the finance person and pre-recorded the hospitality person and we pre-recorded the spiritual gifts person. So all of those things could come together so we could offer this online during the pandemic. And it was a real team effort because all those people had done that work beforehand. So I think that's how we see it. And there's lots of opportunity to involve people. And then certainly like with our new member stuff, we then had follow-up after that. So there were people who followed up on spiritual gifts and people who followed up on getting involved and, things like that. So it really was a team effort.
I got to know, did you hit 50?
Yes, 52.
Yeah, congrats.
52, yeah.
Well, in shifting a little bit from the institutional church to the house church movement, you spent a number of years planting house churches. How does the current state of digital ministry compare to working in the house church space?
I think it just gives us more tools to use, right? So house churches, for me, before really digital ministry was a thing, was in our backyard. and having a meal together and having discussion together based on kind of somebody was assigned to listen to the sermon at the anchor church, and they would present kind of their thoughts about that and stuff. I think today we might, in a house church, use more digital ministry. So we might worship together with an online experience at a church and then have a meal together and discuss. So I think it would give you some opportunities to use resources so you're not always having to put it all together yourself. It could be a nice bridge, I think, for churches. And I think there are some churches that as we started coming back and there was concern around a lot of people in a room, they gathered just with their small group, watched worship together, and were, even though we consider them a small group, but they were basically operating as a house church during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. How do you delineate between what is a house church and what is a small group?
Yeah, so a house church does all the things that a regular church would do, including the sacraments. So if you're not having a baptism at a house church, then it's probably just a small group. Of course, we would say that about communion too, but right now, a lot of people are celebrating communion at home because the pastor's on the screen. So it gets a little squishy.
Yeah. Well, in looking at Valencia, what are some of the apps and platforms that you're using to reach people in the digital space? Yeah,
I would say that the one I've been talking about and working on for a while, and I'm still learning how to make it work, is Facebook groups. So we've used Facebook, their page for the church, of course, for forever. But we recognized that a lot of people would want something a little more personal and needed more privacy in order to share what was going on in their lives or what their needs might be. And so we started a Facebook group, and I was hoping it would become more of like our online campus piece, and it really hasn't. And so I'm continuing to kind of look at that and see what's the best way to do that. We do have quite a few people in the church who are in the Facebook group. And so that's been helpful. I mean, we've used it to resource people. We've used it to provide food and gift cards for people during COVID. We've used it to post a class or a discussion that was more internal for the church. And so I like the platform. I'm just not sure, how best to utilize it. And I don't know how much that will change as we're on screens a little less. If maybe people will be, if you're working in person and your church is online, would you be more open to being in the Facebook group for a Bible study or to connect to new people? I don't know. But we're finding much more posting and communication in that space than on our Facebook page or Instagram page.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and that is, Facebook has really made a deliberate effort to drive people into a space like a group because, for better or for worse, it's what gets people to stay on their platform a little bit longer.
That's exactly
right.
But
they do that because, of course, they're interacting with one another. So we can kind of co-opt that as ministers that want from Facebook for us to share time with people as well, which really is such a huge boon to digital ministry where we now have this accessibility to people. So it sounds like that Facebook group is one of the things that you're dreaming into. You've noted that in a self-diagnosis that you are something of a serial dreamer. Are there other digital ministry outlooks or aspects or ideas that you're playing around with that you're excited about?
Well, I'm going to be starting a podcast. That's different than the church's podcast, which is a sermon, right? So I'm going to be doing a podcast that's more geared toward clergy and more geared toward clergy wellness and helping clergy in the midst of this challenging time in ministry, which I think it's always been challenging, but now it's especially challenging, helping them think about themselves and their own wellness and helping them focus on how to do this really hard job without losing themselves in the middle of it. So I've been working on that. That's been kind of my new little side project, is how I'm going to be putting that together. So I, took a little podcasting class and found the music I can use. And so I'm figuring that out.
Cool. Well, for folks who might want to throw some questions your way, what's a good place to get a hold of you?
You can find me on social media. So you'll find me on Facebook and Instagram at Rev Nicole. So RevNicole. And I also have a website, NicoleReilley.com, and they can find out more about me there and more about the book.
Cool. All right. We'll definitely link up to both your social media accounts and the website, because you've got a unique spelling of Reilley for the last name. So
that's exactly
we'll make sure
right. All the letters.
Out as it were. Well, thank you so much for sharing your experience in this time with us.
Thanks, Ryan. I appreciate it.
So glad to have had this opportunity to connect with another digital ministry practitioner. Again, Nicole Reilley's book is Expanding the Expedition Through Digital Ministry. It's part of a book series called The Greatest Expedition, which deals with the present day journey of evangelism. If this was your kind of session, then I recommend checking out our episode titled The Why of Digital Ministry with Will Ranney, where we dove into laying ideological groundwork for digital ministry. And another good one is Faith Formation in Digital Context with Dr. Emily Peck McLean. It's good for following up on discipleship practices in digital spaces. Again, my name is Ryan Dunn. I'd like to thank resourceunc.org, the online destination for leaders throughout the United Methodist Church. They make this podcast possible. And of course, they host our website, pastoringinthedigitalparish.com, where you can find all the links to Nicole Reilley and more. I'll speak with you again in a new episode next week, our last one of season 3. In the meantime, peace to you.